Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners policy session on this June 28, 2023. County Administrator Gary Schmidt, what's up?
Thank you, Chair Smith. First policy session today is Secure Rural Schools election. Staff from Transportation and Development will present. Dan Johnson, Mike Besner. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners. We are here to have a discussion around Secure Rural Schools methodology. I want to do a little bit of history about this topic. It's in the staff report, which I'm basically going to read some of it verbatim to you. But essentially, in 1908, Congress passed a law to transfer portions of forest grazing fees and timber sale receipts to the state to assist with transportation and education. Okay. However, due to a reduction in logging on federal lands, there was basically an effort by Ron Wyden to move forward the Secure Rural Schools discussion and methodology for transfer of those funds. Essentially, that Secure Rural Schools applies to U.S. Forest Service lands and what they call O&C lands. And as you know, Commissioner Schulz, our representative who works with our O&C counties. When the SRS was reauthorized in 2021 as a part of the federal infrastructure bill, under this new SRS payment methodology, we have to make what are called elections, okay? And these are elections around two different things, one of which is the percentages, because if you look on page 1 of your report, you'll see for like U.S. Forest Service lands and O&C lands, there's different titles in there. And basically, there are ranges of elections you can do for that percentage of distribution. And the board's already made a decision on that back in September, and the decision was to go with the percentages that are called out in that table. The reasoning behind those percentages that are there is that it was staff's intent in working with to try to get as much money in the county's hands where we could, and not have it in others' hands where we had to apply for. And so basically the discussion was, we know these are set funds that are coming to us. It's not, for example, it doesn't go into a state agency where we have to apply for a grant and it's competitive. These are dollars that are coming to us, okay? So that election's been completed. The next election, if you go to page 2 of the staff report, is basically a discussion on the methodology we'd like to use for those percentages, okay? And there's one of two options here. We can use the Secure Rural Schools methodology, okay? Or we can use actual timber receipts. So let's start with the U.S. Forest Service lands. Actually, over the past 7 years, the rolling average, the SRS formula has paid us almost double what the actual receipts are. Okay, so in this packet, you're going to see, first of all, there's an options for U.S. Forest Service lands, either to use the SRS methodology or to use the timber receipts. Our recommendation to you, based off that historical data, is to use the Secure Rural Schools methodology. Okay. The second is regarding the Bureau of Land Management lands, or the O&C lands, okay? So basically, we have coordinated with the Association of O&C Counties executive, Doug Robertson, and Commissioner Schulz been in discussions with O&C entities as well. And as it relates to those O&C lands, right now, the timing's interesting for this selection because we don't know the totality of the timber receipts that are going to be on those O&C lands, but they are hypothetically thinking that the timber receipts could be higher than normal based off wildfire salvage, et cetera. Okay, so this particular year, they could be as much as the SRS or maybe a little bit more. Okay, the nuance around that though is there's no consistency of that, for lack of a better term, because essentially when that salvage operation gets complete, those timber receipts could be reduced. And so basically, you see, what O&C is advising us in our discussions with them, the O&C counties representatives, and our assessment of the data that we have to look at, our recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners would be to use the Secure Rural Schools methodology, although this year the O&C may be a little bit higher, but that Secure Rural Schools methodology gives you more consistency going forward, and based on our observation, will then pay to the county more money in the long run. And also there's consistency with the data and the dollars that we're getting. So there's two options, there's two requests for clarification for you. One is the U.S. Forest Service lands. The second is the ONC lands. And for both of those, the staff is recommending using that secure rural schools methodology. I think we need to work with our representatives at AOC, and I think the deadline for submittal is July.
It's August 1st, but AOC wants to submit it for all Oregon counties at once, and they're asking for it by July 12th, I think it is.
Correct. So
Thank you, Mike.
with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Commissioner Shaw, do you have comments on this, please?
Yes. Like Mr. Johnson said, in the past 7 years, the rate of payment from SRS has been higher than Harvest. And in the coming years, that differential should be even greater, with the Secure Rural Schools payments even being more than Harvest. And the reason is that although in the last 18 months or so, we've seen a great deal of harvest from the 2020 fire-damaged trees, the U.S. Forest Service and BLM are essentially not going to harvest any more salvage. It's already been done. What they can do, in accordance with limitations of federal law, has been done. And other fire-damaged trees that might have had a commercial value, at this point in time, are besieged by insects, and their value is going down every day. So I agree that the Secure Rural Schools payment option is going to be way better for the county in the coming months, in the coming years. And you might be interested to know that BLM manages some 93,000 acres of Clackamas County forest, and the U.S. Forest Service is up just over 250,000, as I recall. And again, what we've seen from the boost in harvest in the last 18 months is done. So the Secure Rural Schools Act option is for both BLM land and U.S. Forest Service managed land in Clackamas County is going to be much better. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments regarding this presentation today?
Seems cut and dry to me.
It does to me, too. Commissioners, I'm looking at the recommendations. There are two recommendations. Gary, do we take them in separate motions or together?
If you just pick which recommendation, you can do a single motion.
Chair, I move we select option 1, select the SRS formula methodology for U.S. Forest Service lands.
Seconded.
Thank you. And we also have a second motion to accept the same methodology for BLM and ONC lands.
So
Do we do-
moved.
No?
No, sorry, there are two options staff is recommending, one or the other. So you just pick one of the two, please.
Okay, and Ben?
It looks like we have a motion for option 1, but I'm wondering, staff, if you can maybe break down to me, what are the outcomes or the differences between the two recommendations or the two options?
Between the options that are there for each item.
Yeah, so we have option 1, select the SRS
Yep.
formula methodology for USFS lands, and then the second one was select an actual timber receipts methodology for USFS lands. Does that speak to election 1 here on that first page?
Secure Rural Schools methodology gives a more constant and consistent and knowledgeable understanding of the revenue we're going to see. There are
We can plan.
They can plan for that, et cetera.
Okay.
And those are dollars that go into various funds versus the timber receipts, which can vary drastically based
Depending on the market and what's harvested.
Any given year, correct.
And so option 1 allows us to go with steady Eddie.
More consistency, yep.
Perfectly, thank you. And that's all I got.
A motion has been made to select the SRS formula methodology for USFS lands, and it has been seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Tony, please take the poll.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-1. Thank you.
Do we need
Chair,
another
just
one?
want to just acknowledge Commissioner Scholl's work on this and appreciate him for his following through.
Thank you. Yes, just,
Okay.
Dan.
We also need a motion for the BLM and ONC.
That's what I was trying to say, Gary, that we could have done this probably in one motion.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Because there's two recommendations.
I apologize, Chair. I looked at the wrong page. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay. There is a second motion to consider for BLM ONC lands. We have two recommendations. Staff has recommendation option 1. Do I hear a motion?
Yeah, I move we select the Secure Rural Schools formula methodology for the BLM ONC lands.
Second.
Commissioner Scholl has moved we select the SRS formula methodology for BLM ONC lands. Commissioner Savas has seconded the motion. Any further discussion?
Chair,
Yes.
if I may, I'd like to remind everybody that the Secure Rural Schools Act is a Band-Aid to sustain those communities in Oregon that historically have prospered from the harvest of our natural resources in this state. And a couple decades back, the Endangered Species Act resulted in the use of the spotted owl to drastically reduce harvest in Clackamas County and the state of Oregon. And it resulted in destitute families in communities that were once proud and prosperous, and working in the forest, working in the mills, doing maintenance on heavy equipment. And the Secure Rural Schools Act has alleviated some of that pain and suffering from those communities. But someday, the Secure Rural Schools Act is going to come to an end. And then what? And my hope is that by that time, this nation, the federal government, will realize that without a managed, sustained harvest of our natural resources, this state's going to hurt. Okay, so just please keep that in mind.
Good points. That's how I cut my teeth in politics, was in 1988. I'm really dating myself. During the Clinton administration, they wanted to list the spotted owl, and through the next several years, they really cut off timber harvests on federal lands. And this is a substitute. This is welfare payments to small communities who depended on it to pay for their schools and their sidewalks and their sewer systems. And it has been woefully inadequate because there is no will at the congressional level to understand how forestry works in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a very sad, sad situation we face ourselves in.
That's true.
Seeing no further discussion, Tony, take the poll.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Thank you very much,
Very much.
gentlemen. Gary, we are ahead of schedule.
Staff is here and can move forward if you wish, or you could take a break.
I think we can bring staff forward. Thank you.
All right. Next session, proposed amendment to County Code Chapter 8.10, short-term rental registration and regulations. County Counsel Stephen Madcore will present.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, Commissioners. I am here to talk about short-term rentals. It's been a while since we've had this discussion, and for the benefit of some of the more recent commissioners, Commissioner West in particular, but also for context for the rest of you, short-term rentals has been a county discussion since 2018. In 2020, a prior board adopted regulations for short-term rentals and also amended the zoning code to allow for short-term rentals. It was a two-parted legislative approach to allow for short-term rentals in all zones at that particular time. That route, it went to LUBA. LUBA sent it back saying it can't be in the forest zones and in the prime ag zones. So we revised that, and that is in the zoning and development ordinance. That case is still at LUBA, where I fully expect that the county will prevail, though. But if it didn't, then we'll have to revisit that issue. What you have on the other side is regulations in our code on how we deal with short-term rentals on the ground. So the board adopted Regulation 6.10 or 8.10 in 2020. It delayed implementation because there was no funding mechanism for it. So we had it on the books, but it was not implemented. That was delayed again until last year, at which point the board actually repealed it, got it off the books, because we weren't implementing it, we weren't enforcing it, and it was law on the books that wasn't being followed. So after that, Commissioner Savis and Commissioner Schull had interest in revising and resurrecting the short-term rental program of sorts. And I understand they went and had some sessions with CPOs and maybe Hamlets along those lines. And I've worked with their policy advisors, Carolyn Hill and Everett Wild, and came up with a proposal that I believe reflects, from what I understand, the result of some of those discussions and what the intent of a new short-term rental program would be. It is a pared-down, revised version of what we had beforehand, which was relatively robust program of insurance and registration and parking and a number of rooms and on-street parking, off-street parking, and certifications, and it wasn't allowed in certain zones as well in the urban area. It was a relatively robust program. This one is, again, slimmed down. And what it does, it allows for short-term rentals in all zones. Short-term rental is less than 30 days. It's Airbnb, it's VRBO, it's Vacation Home, it's all those platforms. They're currently existing in this county right now, unregistered, and probably a lot of them not paying the TRT tax. And that's one of the components of this proposal, is it will probably, hopefully, likely, increase registration and collection of those taxes, which are taxed on the tourists themselves who stay in these houses up at Government Camp and elsewhere. So that's one of the components of this one as well. So the simplified effect of this one is there is no proposed registration fee at this time in this ordinance. If there were to be one, I would recommend you put all fees and all fines in a board order so you could change it over the course of time. It'd be easier. You wouldn't have to adopt an ordinance and change the ordinance. All our fines and fees are done one time a year is how we do it. We do it with one reading, an ordinance, 2 readings, 13 days apart, 90-day effective time. So it's a lot more cumbersome. So keep the fees and fines in a board order. Keep that separate. That's a separate discussion. What this proposal does, though, it says if you want to have a short-term rental in Clackamas County, we have a model form that we did, which was based on what I understood to be some of the parameters that the commissioners had agreed on. Folks would register. It'd be ideally an online fillable form that is click, 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 and it's self-attesting. I, property owner or the representative, do hereby state that I have read the code. We have a legitimate, lawful house use here. We will have insurance. We will maintain regular garbage pickup. We will provide off-street parking as in a manner contemplated by the code. We will notify our people of the noise requirements and the other requirements of the county code. And we will have a 24-hour contact person available should there be issues or problems with occupants that we have here. We won't sublet it. We won't have more than blankety-blank people on site during this particular time period. That's you're taking them at their word is what it is. You have no inspection. You have no registration. You have no proof. You don't say, let me see your proof of insurance. Let me see this. Let me see that. It keeps it simple, right? So that's what I understand the proposal would be. So it's like, we would call it low barrier to short-term rental is what we would call it. And so that would be something that's either online or on paper, and it would be filed with the county. And it also says that I have registered my short-term rental with the county finance for the collection of the transient lodging tax. So you get a twofer with this one. They are complying with 810 of the code, and they're also complying with the transient lodging tax collection and remittance process. So that's the second tier of it, which in both of those forms are included in the packet that we submitted to you earlier. So those are two things that would be required to start the process. And it's really it's not a permit, it's basically a registration. We might give a number, I'm not entirely sure how the commissioners contemplate it. This is going to be something that we'll further chat with finance and or DTD or others, there's some mechanics that have not been worked out on this. And one of them is it's a continual struggle, like who's going to be where is this going to be housed? What department? DTD, code enforcement, finance. Those are details that county admin and the board can work out. I'm just providing some of the code structure for it. So again, it's a pared down version of the original one, but it has the stuff that people were concerned with. It's insurance, it's parking, it's noise, it's garbage. It's those things that the person says they will maintain. And if there's a problem at the house, they're supposed to have somebody would call and say, hey, it's noisy over there. Hey, you got trash over there. You got people parking all over the place. Enforcement would be as is regularly existing today. It'd be, if it's parking, it'd likely be the sheriff's office. It'd likely be a low priority. It would be noise, again, sheriff's office, likely a low priority. What this one encourages people to do is be a good neighbor. If you have difficulties with your neighbor, approach them, write to them, call them. It's voluntary compliance is what we're trying to encourage here. People be adult about it, be professional about it, be mature about it. Don't trash your neighborhood, right? So that's what it is encouraging people to do, because in all fairness, county staff isn't going to be there on a Saturday night up at government camp for a party on New Year's Eve or whenever it might be, and nor is the sheriff's office going to have time or resources to devote to those types of things. It's going to be like a good neighbor agreement to a certain extent. So there's also there's an emergency revocation provision in there if the building is deemed unsafe, and it's unlikely that those are going to happen. But if it is, the building official would be able to shut it down immediately. There's also provisions in there that if there's violations, they would get a letter from county staff. We're not entirely sure if that's code enforcement, if that's finance, but they would get a letter from county staff saying there's been reports about this, get it cured. And over the course of time, if they have repeated instances, it could go to a hearings officer. They could have fines, they could have penalties, they could have revocation of the authorization to do a short-term rental itself. So those are kind of like the bones of it. And if there's other additional terms that the commissioners think should not be in there or should be in there, happy to do it. I was just trying to discern the intent of the folks that you talk to in your direction on this, working with your staff on it. And so that's what I have, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you have. We have a few blanks in here because I'm not entirely sure where to plug some of these things. I talked to Dan about it. Dan has some concerns about funding. I understand that there has been upwards to $200,000 offered by the Tourism Development Council as seed funding for this particular program. And I'm not entirely sure if that goes on the front end, on receiving these applications, or does it go on the back end for enforcing it, or is it a combination of both? But as it stands, finance currently collects and distributes the transient lodging tax, so that's already in existence. We anticipate, hopefully, that volume will increase, because that's one of the objectives here, is that you get compliance with everybody on the TRT. So those are all, again, questions that remain to be answered. Those are more policy questions than they are legal and structure for the code itself. But happy to answer any questions that the commissioners might have.
Thank you. I know all commissioners want to opine on this, and this proposal, I've read through it, and I do like it better than the others. I will say, as a person who paid this tax for 14 years because I owned a hotel in Molalla, the forms on here are very innocuous. In fact, the form on the transient lodging tax registration is tax that's paid every month based on your gross receipts, minus a few things. You fill it out, you plug in. This form is a little bit different than the one I did. And you put in what your gross receipts were, minus they take off for this, minus if you fill out the form yourself and it's on time, you get a credit for filling out the form, you get a credit for filling it out on time. However, if you're late, those credits go away. And I believe you get 15 days from the day the tax is due to fill it out, and then you also have your quarterly state reports that go to the state of Oregon, of which the tax is 1%. And the form that I used computed your tax for you. You put in your numbers, tax. It was so easy. It was really so easy. I'm assuming that if this goes to finance, it will be the same. But like you say, Stephen, we don't know. Finance is used to collecting this tax and tracking how much comes in. Now, a couple commissioners have gone to our tourism folks, and they have said they would front up the $200,000, and you folks can speak to that. My question for the commissioners is, how is that $200,000 going to be spent, and do we have a business plan for that? Or are we relying on the departments to develop that business plan for us? I believe Ben was first. Commissioner West, you were first, and then Commissioner Savas. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a little bit of time since we last talked about this. Maybe Commissioner Savas or Scholl can remind me why we are not doing a registration fee. I know there was some reasoning behind not having those fees or that fee schedule, but it sounds like if we ever did want them, it would be behoove us, am I right, Stephen, to have something in structure in place now, so you don't have to do a whole new ordinance process, that you have a more complete, it's more complete up front. So I'm kind of curious about that and your guys' thoughts on that. I had another question, I already just escaped my mind. Anyways, if it pops back in my mind, I'll come back. But I'm curious about the registration fee piece or the fee schedule and how you spoke to that a little bit in your presentation to us.
He did say fees were adopted on a yearly basis all at once for all departments.
Okay.
He did say that in his presentation. Was that correct, Stephen?
That is correct. Yep. And you would do it by way of a board order as opposed to putting it in the ordinance itself.
Oh, okay.
The lack of a registration fee was one of the omissions and one of the reasons why this program really never got off the ground, because it wasn't funded. And so the board was not in support of having registration fees for short-term rentals. And so that's one of the funding shortfalls.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember my question now, so I'm going to pop right back in. Why, oh my gosh, I had it. I'll come back. Just come back to me.
Thank you. You can come back.
Yeah.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, we have, this goes back a number of years with the different commission. Commissioner Schrader and I have, been through this ride for a long time. So I think we have, and I did go to all the public meetings that were available over the years. So I have a pretty good idea about all the sensitivities. We're not going to make everyone perfectly happy. This is, or as a reminder, a pilot. So it's designed to be a 2-year pilot where we come back. Always been a big believer in incentivizing people to be compliant and respectful as opposed to being punitive. So the registration fee was viewed as something that was either punitive or for those that are tax adverse, or maybe for those who only had limited short-term rentals, it would be a burden. It'd be a financial burden. So accolades and great appreciation to all the staff who here in the room today, Caroline and Everett, Mr. Madcore, Mr. Johnson. Nate Boderman is no longer with us, but he also helped on this and come up with a clever means of funding this, which really is a surcharge on the tourism tax that would apply to this. We knew that we could fly this. We had a financial model that this could fly with only a $125,000 contribution from TDC for the startup. It's a one-time startup fee. And we knew it could fly with the current model in place, or believe it will, and the pilot will prove that within short time. However, we asked between 125 and 200, and they chose to go for the 200. So thank you to the TDC for listening. I think this is a great opportunity to, number one, strengthen our relationship with the TDC, strengthen our relationship with the community. One important clarification I do want to make is this does not require any unusual or any burden or put any additional requirements on either the sheriff's office or code enforcement. This relies on the affidavit aspect and the person who is hired to administer it to If you're not compliant with what you sign in the affidavit, that is the means of enforcement. It does not require the sheriff's office, does not require code enforcement. But, however, just like any property owner, if you're doing something negative on your property that is out of compliance, certainly, just like any other neighboring property, STR or not, we can't discriminate. They're subject to code enforcement for whatever that means. If they're doing something illegally, whether they're, that's against the law, and it's a sheriff's office responsibility, that's not going to be discriminated either. The sheriff will respond to that property like any other property. But we really think that this means will address the bad actors and bring them into compliance or not. If they're not, then they get excluded. It's through this action of 3 strikes, essentially, they will be eliminated from being eligible to be an STR operator. There's currently no cap on this. I know that was another issue to be discussed or considered perhaps in the far future. We'll see how this goes. But I did want to make that clarification that there is no burden on those departments. And I believe that the recommendation from Administrator Schmidt was how this is under finance, as I believe.
That is
so
correct,
that
yes.
determination was made. And of course, I think this is really, as Mr. I really like the words that legal counsel used, low barrier, meaning it's really not a burden. It is simplified. And I'm happy to field any questions or concerns. And we also have our staff here who worked on this diligently that can answer any questions I don't have or I can't respond to.
Commissioner Scholl.
Yes, thank you. This has been a trying, difficult subject to deal with. It comes with a great deal of emotional response from constituents throughout the county, some very keen on seeing regulation, others not so keen on seeing regulation. So this work we have in front of us today, this recommended regulation, is a product of input from many constituents and also from lessons learned from other counties in the state and the nation. This plan is a cost-effective plan for STR owners, and it addresses the many complaints and problems STRs have presented to neighborhoods. It's a balance of respect for the property owners who want to have an STR and a balance of respect for people who don't have STRs. In terms of the fee here, the old idea to have a registration fee of like $800 for a 2-year registration was considered to be unfair. Why? Because some STRs are operated all year long as primary STR buildings. Other STRs are operated just a couple weeks out of the year. So we came up with the idea of the surcharge on the transient lodging tax. Now, what this is very, very small. For a $100 lodging bill, it's an 85-cent fee. For a $1,000 bill, it's $8.50. So this is very inexpensive and a very inefficient way to fund operations to manage short-term rentals. The other thing, too, is the current regulation is a start, a beginning to regulate the STR issue. Like Commissioner Savas said, in 2 years, we'll look at it again. Some of the things people are asking about is, well, this regulation doesn't limit the number of STRs. And that's true, it doesn't. In 2 years, we can look at that and maybe develop ways to limit STRs. It also does not require a STR operator to be an owner-occupier of the building, which in a couple years after we look at how this goes, that could be looked at again also. So again, I think what we have here is a product that has been evolved for, the last 4 or 5 years, actually. And I think it is going to be received by the people of the county in a positive way, both from STR operators and those who are neighbors of STRs. Thank you.
Commissioner West, and then I have some questions.
Okay, it's back in my brain. Last night I booked an Airbnb in the Seattle area, and it collects taxes and fees right there through the website. Most STRs do utilize HomeAway, Airbnb, VBRO, one of those booking sites. I don't understand, and just maybe just in level of ignorance, I don't understand why we have a form that people report the tax to if most of these booking sites already will collect taxes and fees. I'm not understanding how those two things work together. And maybe, please.
I can address that.
Educate me on that one. And then before you answer that, I'm going to make a tortured analogy, which is always dangerous. I'm going to try to get kind of how I perceive this, and in essence, why I think I really like this. And famous politician Harvey Milk, former mayor of San Francisco, had quite a storied political career, but he got into politics in his local community, local government, because in San Francisco, where he lived, nobody was picking up their dog waste. Nobody. It was just everywhere. And he was just like fed up. How could people not pick up after their dog, right? How could they not take care of not just their community, but their responsibility? And so he ran on passing an ordinance that had a similar tone to this about kind of self-regulation and culture within a community to take care of itself, and to not be overly punitive. And some of this, like, well, you can never, this is empty, but his critics are like, this is empty, this is never going to happen because there's no punitive measure to this. And he goes, no, when we pass this and make it the norm, what's going to happen in the parks is if you don't have your doggy baggie with you, then your neighbors will scold you and sneer you and give you some side eye. And so we all live that today. If you have a dog and you accidentally forget your doggy bag and you're not picking up and doing your responsibility in the park, you are like asking somebody around you for something to clean this up because you don't want to be perceived as the guy that doesn't pick up after their animal. In the same way, maybe this is a tortured analogy, as like the kind of the Harvey Milk model is we want STRs to be good neighbors and citizens and to do their part in maintaining public, vibrant spaces and communities. Maybe that's a tortured analogy, but I see some parallels between Harvey Milk's work and this being a catalyst for him into public service and what we're trying to do with this program. And then, if anybody could educate me on this Airbnb and how we collect fees, that would just help me have a better understanding how this works.
May I take a stab at that?
Please.
Okay. We have apples and oranges here regarding the fees.
Okay.
Like I said, I was in this business for 14 years. All right. You have what the regulated government county program is. That is a certain tax rate. I believe I paid 5% to Clackamas County. Additionally, I paid 1% to the state of Oregon. I don't see any of those fees addressed in here, however, and that's my question for Stephen, why? Okay. That is this side of the ledger. The Airbnbs, VRBOs, vacation rental by owners, is a commercial entity where you can sign up your property and they manage it for you. That's why when you go, and I have rented these all over, just like you've been, you see the fees go ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. Because not only do you have your, on this side of the ledger, the government ledger, you have the state fee, the county fee, and a city fee. And that's why if you go to the Oregon coast, the rental taxes at the Oregon coast are sky high in Oregon. Okay, so you have 3 taxes over here on this side of the ledger. If you decide to register your property of an Airbnb, because let's say you're working, you don't want to take the management, you don't want to have to collect the credit cards, you don't want to have to go and clean your house, you will employ a commercial entity to manage the property for you. That is why these fees are so high. So the owner of the house elects to do that. Then they pass the fees on to the person renting it. So when you say that, you are correct. There's two sides of the ledger on that. That's how they choose to manage their property. I will say, when I owned my inn in Malala, people says, well, you need to put it on the Airbnb. So I tried the Airbnb model for my inn. And at that time, the Airbnb model did not work. It was a disaster, an outright disaster as an owner coming in, because I would want to rent one room off the Airbnb. And I would say one room. And I remember I had a van full of people drive up from San Francisco thinking they got the entire structure for the price of one room. And so it's very difficult. It's very difficult to manage some of this stuff, and my hat's off. So I guess my first question is, why aren't the fees outlined in this document before us?
Because,
Tax.
number one, the tax is already in county code. It's in a different chapter. The transient lodging tax is in a different chapter itself. That's standalone. And if you were to have a registration fee or a collection fee or a penalty component to this, you would have it in the appendix to the county code, which would be done by board order. That's where all our numbers are, other than the transient lodging tax. They're all in the appendix to the county code. Fines, fees, penalties, application fees, that's where that number would be.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is, the county collects, is it 5%? Can somebody answer me that?
I thought it was 6 for the
Maybe it's 6,
transient.
maybe it's 6, okay, and it's 7% total. Why isn't that, I'm just asking, why isn't it listed here so people will know? That
Well,
is,
it's cross-referenced. You could certainly list it if you wanted to. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
But we don't know the real number.
So-
It's either 5% or 6%.
It's easily found out.
And I do think, for transparency, that needs to be listed. If you pay your tax on time, you get a discount. However, if you don't pay your tax on time, the discount is forfeited, right? Makes sense. So it somehow needs to be referenced in this. I just think that is smart business. My second question, I don't see anywhere in here that this says it's a 2-year pilot. Now, is that language added later at the hearing? And this is why. Because whoever's sitting here at this dais 2 years from now needs to know the reason why this is coming back to us, because it is a 2-year pilot. And frankly, we've had things come to us, commissioners, that were passed by previous boards, and we really weren't sure why we were doing, they somehow expired, or they need to be nuanced or somehow. I do think that the 2-year language needs to be someplace. If not today, is it added later? And Paul, you mentioned the 3 strikes. And what do you mean by 3 strikes, and is it listed here? I'm not sure what 3 strikes and you're out means, because when I ran my establishment, I never knew of anything. Thank you.
A couple of things, Chair. It's 6%, the county's TRT,
All right.
and we can include that in here if you want. If you wanted to say at the tail end, this is a 2-year pilot project and will be revisited by the board, a subsequent board, 2 years from the effective date, easily done.
Okay.
And it does not have 3 strikes. It has 2 contact letters is what you have here. You do have an emergency revocation provision, and if you don't register and you list your property, that's subject to penalty as well. But we don't have a 3 strikes. If you wanted one, we certainly could do it. The problem with 3 strikes is what's a strike?
Right.
Is a strike a noise violation, a
Right.
car violation, 13 people as
Or-
opposed
or
to
health-
12?
Or a health and safety violation?
Right. If you wanted to, we could do it, though. That
I
requires
don't
more
know. I'm
enforcement.
just asking because Commissioner Savas mentioned that, and I was wondering what his thinking was on that. Okay, 6%. I personally would like the tax rate included in this today, and I would like the 2-year pilot from the adopted date going forward. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think it'd be appropriate at this point to bring up Caroline and Everett to add some clarification to some of the questions that have been asked, and especially with the first point Chair Smith asked about, which was, I think Commissioner West also alluded to, is that how is that collected? And I'll say briefly, those that choose to collect all the taxes at once, the owner, if they use, let's say Airbnb, Airbnb will find out what was been introduced in that particular jurisdiction, for example, and they'll factor all that into the formula, and it'll be automatic. So I stand corrected on the 3 strikes. This has been updated slightly, but I thought it'd be important to address those questions. So Everett, Caroline, anything you want to jump in on?
Go ahead. Who wants to speak first? Go ahead.
I can go first. Everett Wild, Policy Advisor for the Board of County Commissioners. Commissioner West, to your question, there's been a number of court cases and legislation over the years in Oregon and other states that have essentially created a framework where Airbnb and HomeAway and VRBO have argued that we are just an intermediary. We're a platform. We are not providing the service, therefore we don't need to collect the lodging tax. So the onus falls on the owner or the operator, individual owner and operator. Some jurisdictions have come up with individual agreements directly with the companies that they will do that work on the jurisdiction's behalf. But we would have to come up with that special agreement with them ourselves. Commissioner Savas, yes, there's no 3 strikes. We had talked about this with Commissioner Scholl, Commissioner Savas, and staff at length. As Mr. Madcore pointed out, it's kind of hard to judge what's a ball, what's a strike, and how those would be enforced. And then each time you were given a strike, you would have a due process right to go through a process. So it added a lot of administrative and cost burden. So what's in here now is essentially you get a warning letter. Hey, we saw that you're advertising, you're not registered. Please register. Then you get a follow-up letter. So giving people, as Mr. Madcore said, benefit of the doubt, good neighbor agreement type model where you would be able to get those letters and correct the action, and then penalties could occur at the end if you continue to rent and weren't registered.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yes?
So just so I understand, because I've rented this way for property, all of the country. I can't remember a time where local taxes weren't collected. Do those local taxes go directly to the owner, and then the owner has to fill out the paperwork like Chair Smith said she used to have to do, and then they personally send it in? Or are we relying on these other companies to say, we collected it for you, it's going straight to the government, and they get credit for it? Like, I'm still not totally clear how this fee process works and the collection of the taxes work.
Yeah, for sake of example, let's say Commissioner Scholl is the owner of the Airbnb. And let's just say that one of these operators does not collect the full tax. Ultimately, Commissioner Scholl, as owner of the Airbnb, is responsible for all the taxes, not a burden to the person who is actually renting the Airbnb. Ultimately, the property owner or the STR owner is the one who's responsible.
So whether it goes through the VRBO or Airbnb or not, however it's rented is regardless, that percentage, either by filling out the paperwork or being sent in by Airbnb or one of those sites, is how we get the tax, right? And so, and then we are making sure we get the tax because we have a mechanism now which to register every one of these different rental properties that people have.
Yes, so in Clackamas County currently, the onus of filing and remitting transient lodging tax falls to the owner or operator of the individual hotel, short-term rental, whatever. So that would not change. The transient lodging tax is 6%, was passed by the voters. Any change to the transient lodging tax would have to be approved by the voters. And so this program is not proposing any changes to the transient lodging tax program. the funds that are received from the TLT are managed by the Tourism Development Council. So the way that this program would work is really on the enforcement side, not on the lodging tax side, if that answers your question.
How do we know, like, you've rented this out 20 days a month for the last 12 months? How do we not know that they're gonna only, like, is there verification with how much they owe us? Like on the lodging tax, how do we verify what the homeowner or the operator owes? How do we like make sure like, hey, we know hey, you're shorting us. You're registered, you're shorting us. You only are paying for 10 days a month you've rented. We are pretty sure you've done it 20 days a month. Like, where's that accountability piece?
I'll get that one, Everett. There's section 810.060, which provides for the examination of books, records, and premises. Like all tax payments, it's done on good faith and law-abiding component of things. But if you register, you also are agreeing to have your premises inspected, including your finances for how often have you rented this place out?
So it can be audited basically
Yeah.
for compliance. Okay.
Correct.
I have another question, but Commissioner Scholl, you have your light on.
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify something on this short-term rental fee. The transient lodging tax, the 6%, that's standalone, okay? What we have here doesn't really depend on that. It is a 0.85 of 1% of the lodging receipt. In other words, if I rent STR in Clackamas County, I pay my transient lodging tax, and in addition, I pay, if my bill is $100, I'm going to owe 85 cents for the administration of the short-term rentals in this program. If my bill is $1,000, it's $8.50. So it's very small, a fraction of 1%. But the transient lodging tax can go up and down, be changed, modified at the state level. It doesn't affect our fee.
Yeah, and to that point, Mr. Madcore, if you add the language requested by Commissioner Smith, I would just say the existing transient voter-approved lodging tax of 6% remains intact.
And,
Because that's what it was, it's a voter-approved tax.
and Paul, is this 0.85 to 1% in addition?
It's based on the rental itself,
That's in
as
addition.
Commissioner Scholl outlined.
Chair,
So we have two.
yeah, Chair Smith, that 0.85 of 1%, that 85 cents
Yep.
in 100, that's in addition, that's a Clackamas County fee for short-term rentals.
So
It
in-
is in addition to the state TLT.
And that needs to be stated in this document as well.
Yeah, I would agree that, especially when we have the hearing, you know, what we're doing today is the legal aspect of what we asked Mr. Madcore to do, so he's bringing back exactly what.
Right.
Thank you for that.
But,
And so
but we need to say how much this is going to cost, because that needs to be really clear. So we have the 6% county TRT tax, and then we have the additional 0.5%, which is fine, 0.85%, excuse me, which is fine, but I want it in the document. I also want it to be very clear that this is a 2-year pilot program. Additionally, health inspections are usually required for all rentals. Are health inspections required for the single, and why is that not, Caroline?
They haven't been required so far, so we were trying to keep it as low barrier, like.
Well, they
Stephen
haven't been
Madcore said.
required because we haven't had any regulation.
Correct.
That's why. Okay. But I suppose if somebody rents a place and it's not as expected or represented as, you know, they go online and say, oh, this place was dirty, I don't want to have it again. Okay. I'm just curious because that's part of the regulations as well, is that if you're going to engage in this business, you must follow health and safety protocols.
I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that short-term rentals are held under different requirements than um,
A hotel.
bed and breakfast and hotels and so on. So they're different requirements.
Okay. That's good to know. That's good to know if somebody's
And
listening.
Chair, your operation was a bed and breakfast, not an Airbnb.
Oh, no, it was all full on out. I mean, I had every inspection, every regulation, this and that, you know. I had to know the names of diseases on my kitchen inspection. I says, "You're kidding me, right? Knock it off." And they come out once a year and expect me to know every communicable disease known to human biology, and let's face it, that didn't happen. They were being cute with me, of course. So I think I have my questions answered to this. Anything else from the board? Commissioner West?
Does this break down to the nitty-gritty of, I have a shared room, you go to Airbnb, you can have a 2-bedroom apartment, and you can let strangers come and stay with you in the apartment. People do this, it's kind of a thing that maybe younger generations enjoy more, but they have shared rooms also, which I think is uniquely different than I have an entire place that I rent out as a vacation rental. And I don't know if those apply, are we only talking about things that maybe directly compete with the hotel industry? I don't know if like having a shared room or a mother-in-law suite often is how people do this. Is it that nuanced?
This contemplates a living unit.
A living, unit. What does that
Bathrooms,
mean, living
kitchens.
unit?
It means that a dwelling unit is a single unit providing complete independent living facilities for one or more persons, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. So it would exclude.
So bedroom wouldn't count, or your basement that you have that's redone with its own separate entrance would?
An efficiency unit, absolutely, it would capture that.
That's like a mother-in-law-ish type of attachment?
30 days.
But
Yes.
if I have a second master bedroom that I'll rent out, that's not the same thing. That doesn't fall in the same thing like under VBRO and vacation rental.
Not according to this current proposed definition.
Should it?
So if I may, Commissioner West, I was looking for an Airbnb when we went down for our California trip earlier this year, and I did notice that that industry is opening up to an apartment, a second bedroom in an apartment. And I would think, that's not anything I want to do, right?
Yeah.
So we chose not to, but it was kind of enlightening to realize that, that's not contemplated here. I'm not sure how marketable that'll be.
I know it's a little bit like hostel living. It is done all over the world. Like, I have a second master bedroom, or I have a little bit private-ish kind of space, but it's not totally private with shared spaces. It is not that uncommon. So I'm just curious if it's been considered or if we should talk about it.
Yeah, it's not part of our plan.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question. Oh, Paul, you had your light on?
Oh, that was it.
Okay. Are these units subject to the state transit tax?
Yes, they would be.
And I quoted 1%, but I think they increased it, didn't they?
I think it's still 1%, Chair. They might have, I thought it was 1%.
Maybe it was 0.75% and they increased it to 1. I don't remember, honestly. So, in this document, do we make them aware that there is also a state tax to pay?
Is that our job?
I don't know, I'm asking the question.
No, it wouldn't hurt to say the current state and
Local
local taxes
taxes.
are XXX, which are voter approved or whatnot, however they were done. It wouldn't hurt.
Do you want that in the code? Do you want that in the registration form that we put out? Owner or representative acknowledges that there will be state taxes and local taxes and user fees associated with
I think you
renting
should.
this.
I think you should. I think it should be in this document that we're contemplating for the hearing and on the registration fee.
We can do that.
Yeah, and I want to make sure it is in the packet for the hearing so that people can be informed and learn what the program is. So I don't expect it to be in the ordinance.
No.
But I expect a full
Just-
explanatory,
Yeah.
somewhat detailed.
Just as an awareness, that tax is collected quarterly, and the county does not collect that tax. It goes to Oregon Revenue Department. So that's a whole different ballywick. But what I want to say is, if this goes forward, I suspect it will, there are benefits to having your property registered with the TDC, because they can help you. manage it. You can take advantage of their marketing programs. You can, back during the day, they would offer incentives for owners of properties to participate in these programs. So there could be more benefit here than just on the surface, but that is a whole nother department to worry about. Commissioner West?
Just, not to beat the dead horse, I just don't think my question was totally answered. Are we, there is no obligation to somebody that technically is doing shared housing and doesn't rent the entire space to somebody else in this obligation for this tax or for, I mean, it is quite common to not rent the entire space. You go to Airbnb and you need to click, I want the entire space, or you very well might get a very nice shared housing unit.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, I've done it all over the United States. It is absolutely true, especially with younger generations. They will save a couple more dimes and they will do shared housing. I just don't know whether we're not talking about something that should be addressed in this.
Yeah, I think we can contemplate that after the pilot.
Okay.
The two-year time period and address it, and we'll just mark that as one of the things we need to come back and redress.
I think I agree with that. I
Okay.
don't think right now that's an issue. I'm not saying it would not be for the future.
But do they have to pay the tax in general anyways?
We wouldn't
So-
even know.
Commissioner West, to answer your question, the trigger for whether you have to pay the transient lodging tax, whether the short-term rental code would apply to you, is not about the size of the space rented, it's about the duration. So if you're renting for more than 30 days, you're not a short-term rental. So if you were to rent a bedroom to a friend, mother-in-law style unit for 90 days, 6 months, a whole year, that would be a long-term tenant. This wouldn't apply.
Okay.
So it's about the duration,
Not about the
not
property
about
type?
the property type, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
To be clear, the definition of lodging in the TRT code is different than the definition you have here. The TRT applies to rooming houses and rooms and hotel rooms and things along those lines. That's not what we have here. We're talking about standalone homes, primarily up at Government Camp or Sandy, Zigzag, Rhododendron, areas like that, where folks rent, like you all have already, for a weekend. Things like that. It doesn't apply to a hotel room. It doesn't apply to a boarding house, but the tax would.
Okay,
Yeah, the definition of lodging in the TRT is broader than the proposed definition here.
okay.
Yeah.
And then if we're being fair, I hope that we are collecting that tax regardless of the property type if they're due to pay it. That's what I hope.
We don't have tax police, Ben.
I know, but I'm just hoping that we are
Okay, Commissioner
everybody's
Savas?
fairly paying their
Thank you.
share.
We're trying.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I just want to just add, just to bring us back to how we got here. The reason we got here is the issue about being bad neighbors when the STR operator is absent. The situation you're talking about is when they're present,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
So we are talking about the absentee owner operator and the chaos that creates. It's far less, so meaning that if they're doing something that's woefully inconsistent with code enforcement or law, the owner who's there every day, who's renting the room out, is findable and we don't have to worry about them, and possibly also, we're going to be responsible, right? So that's a much different scenario.
You're right, that's a good point.
What's next, Gary?
Do you want to go to a public hearing for a first reading on a draft ordinance 8.10 of the county code authorizing registration of short-term rentals in a format similar to what you have in front of you, with the addition of a sunset clause or a 2-year pilot period with the reference to state tax and our own TRT? And I also hear that there is a user fee of sorts of the 0.85% that's contemplated as well.
Chair, I'll make the motion.
Yes.
Okay. Chair, I move that we proceed with the current version of Chapter 8.1 to the first public hearing on a proposed ordinance change with the amendments cited by legal counsel.
I'll second.
Commissioner Savas has moved we proceed with the current version of Chapter 8.10 to the first public hearing, the proposed ordinance change with the additions just cited by county council, and Commissioner West has seconded that motion. Any further discussion? Good, very good work. Thank you very much. I will say this is a much, much improved. I have no heartburn over this. I do think that people who are not currently paying need to pay because everybody else does. And if they have to raise their rates a little bit to do it, to be competitive with the people who are paying, and that's their purview or not. Thank you very much. Tony, take the poll.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephen, Caroline, and Everett.
Thanks for all your good work.
Gary, what's next?
You are done for this morning. You will reconvene at 1 PM. It's earlier, 1 PM for a policy session, and then 2 PM will be your planning session.
Got it. Wonderful.
Thanks, Gary.
What's the agenda for the planning session?